If you want power, true power, not the illusion of influence that society offers to its most compliant servants, you must learn to think like a demon. Not the cartoonish demons of religious mythology, but the archetypal demon, the entity that operates beyond good and evil, that pursues its objectives with perfect strategic clarity, unhindered by moral constraints that paralyze lesser beings. The demon's strategic thinking operates on a level that moral minds cannot reach because it's unencumbered by the emotional and ethical constraints that limit human analysis. While ordinary people process information through filters of what they want to be true, what would be fair, or what would make them feel comfortable, the demon processes information through a single filter: accuracy. This commitment to accuracy over comfort enables what military strategists call cold analysis, evaluation of situations based on objective factors rather than wishful thinking or moral preferences. The demon can acknowledge uncomfortable truths that moral people refuse to see, because accepting these truths would conflict with their self-image or value system. For example, the demon can recognize that some people are simply more capable, intelligent, or motivated than others without feeling guilty about this inequality, or compelled to pretend that all people are equal in their abilities and contributions. This recognition allows for strategic decisions based on actual capabilities rather than idealistic assumptions about human nature. The demon can also acknowledge that most people are primarily motivated by self-interest rather than altruistic concern for others, and it can design strategies that work with this reality rather than fighting against it. While moral people often feel disappointed when others fail to live up to ethical ideals, the demon expects people to act according to their interests and positions itself to benefit from this predictable behavior. This realistic assessment of human nature enables what we might call incentive-based thinking, the ability to predict and influence behavior by understanding what people actually want rather than what they claim to value. The demon can motivate others effectively because it focuses on their genuine interests rather than their stated principles. The demon's strategic thinking also transcends the time horizons that limit most human planning. While ordinary people focus on immediate consequences and short-term comfort, the demon thinks in terms of long-term positioning and compound effects. It can accept short-term costs that moral people won't tolerate because it sees how these costs create long-term advantages. This extended time perspective allows for what chess masters call positional thinking, making moves that don't provide immediate benefits, but that improve overall strategic position for future opportunities. The demon can invest in capabilities, relationships, and resources that won't pay off for years because it's planning campaigns rather than just battles. The demon's strategic mind also operates through what intelligence analysts call systems thinking, understanding how different elements interact to create outcomes rather than focusing on individual events or isolated factors. While moral people often react to symptoms, the demon identifies and influences the underlying systems that generate those symptoms. This systems perspective enables the demon to create leverage by making small changes that produce large effects, rather than trying to overpower systems through brute force. It can identify the critical points where minimal effort produces maximum impact, allowing it to achieve objectives that would be impossible through conventional approaches. Perhaps most importantly, the demon's strategic thinking includes what military planners call deception and misdirection, the ability to control what others perceive, understand, and expect. While moral people feel obligated to be transparent about their intentions and methods, The demon recognizes that information is a strategic resource that should be shared selectively. This doesn't mean lying constantly or deceiving everyone about everything. It means understanding that different people need different information at different times, and that revealing all your intentions and capabilities eliminates tactical advantages that could serve everyone's interests better than complete transparency. The demon can present different aspects of itself to different audiences based on what those audiences need to see to make decisions that serve the demon's objectives. This isn't dishonesty, it's strategic communication that recognizes that people can only process limited information at any given time. The demon's strategic mind also employs what negotiation experts call frame control, the ability to shape how situations are interpreted and understood. While ordinary people accept whatever frame others impose on situations, the demon actively creates interpretive frameworks that support its objectives. For instance, instead of accepting a situation as a negotiation where parties compete for limited resources, the demon might reframe it as a collaboration where parties work together to create value that serves everyone's interests. This reframing changes how everyone thinks about the situation and often leads to better outcomes for all involved. The demon understands that reality is largely subjective, and that controlling how others perceive and interpret situations is often more powerful than trying to control external circumstances directly. By shaping narratives, managing information flow, and influencing interpretive frameworks, the demon can achieve objectives that would be impossible through direct action. Finally, the demon's strategic thinking includes what economists call optionality preservation, making choices that maintain future flexibility rather than committing to specific paths too early. While moral people often feel obligated to maintain consistency and honor commitments, even when circumstances change, the demon maintains the flexibility to adapt strategies as new information becomes available. This strategic flexibility allows the demon to take advantage of unexpected opportunities while avoiding being trapped by previous decisions that no longer serve its objectives. It can maintain multiple potential paths forward and choose among them based on how situations develop, rather than being locked into approaches that may prove suboptimal. The combination of accurate analysis, long-term thinking, systems understanding, strategic communication, frame control, and maintained flexibility creates a decision-making capacity that operates far beyond the limitations that moral and emotional constraints impose on ordinary human intelligence. Understanding demonic consciousness intellectually is only valuable if it translates into practical methods that produce superior results in actual situations. The demon's approach to common challenges reveals specific techniques that can be learned and applied by anyone willing to transcend moral limitations and social conditioning. In negotiations, the demon employs what we might call interest archaeology, digging beneath stated positions to understand what each party actually needs and values. While ordinary people argue about positions and try to compromise between competing demands, the demon identifies the underlying interests that create those positions and finds solutions that serve everyone's core needs. For example, in a salary negotiation, the demon doesn't just focus on the dollar amount being discussed. It investigates what the employer actually values: productivity, loyalty, skill development, reduced turnover, and what the employee actually needs: financial security, recognition, growth opportunities, flexible scheduling. Then it crafts proposals that address these underlying interests rather than just splitting the difference on salary numbers. This approach, often produces outcomes that both parties prefer to any compromise solution because it addresses what people actually care about rather than what they think they're supposed to ask for. In competitive situations, the demon uses what military strategists call force multiplication, achieving superior results through intelligence and positioning rather than direct confrontation. Instead of trying to overpower competitors through brute force, the demon identifies advantages that competitors cannot easily replicate. The demon might build capabilities that create unique value rather than competing on price. It might develop relationships that provide exclusive access to opportunities. It might position itself in market segments where its particular strengths create natural advantages. The goal is to compete in ways that emphasize your strengths while making others' advantages irrelevant. In leadership situations, the demon employs what we might call gravitational influence, becoming the kind of person that others naturally want to follow, rather than trying to push or manipulate them into compliance. This involves developing genuine capabilities that others respect, creating vision that others find inspiring, and demonstrating results that others want to emulate. The demon doesn't try to control others directly. It develops such clear competence and strategic thinking that others voluntarily align with its direction because they recognize that alignment serves their own interests. This gravitational approach creates more sustainable influence than coercive methods because it's based on value creation rather than force. In social dynamics, the demon practices what we might call selective authenticity, being genuinely itself while choosing which aspects of itself to emphasize in different contexts. This isn't deception, it's recognition that different situations call for different facets of your personality and capabilities. The demon might emphasize its analytical capabilities in business contexts, its creative abilities in artistic environments, its competitive drive in challenging situations, and its supportive nature in relationships. Each expression is authentic, but the demon strategically chooses which authentic aspects to highlight based on what would be most beneficial in each context. In problem solving, the demon uses what systems analysts call constraint identification, finding the limiting factors that prevent optimal outcomes and either eliminating those constraints or designing solutions that work around them. While ordinary people often try to solve problems through harder work or more resources, the demon identifies what's actually preventing success. The constraint might be lack of specific information, absence of key relationships, insufficient capabilities, poor resource allocation, or limiting beliefs. Once the real constraint is identified, the demon can address it directly rather than wasting effort on symptoms or secondary factors. In resource management, the demon employs what economists call compound leverage, using existing resources to create expanding capacity for greater impact over time. Instead of consuming resources for immediate gratification, the demon invests resources in ways that generate greater resources in the future. This might involve investing time in skill development that creates long-term earning capacity, building relationships that provide ongoing opportunities, creating systems that generate passive income, or developing reputation that attracts valuable partnerships. The demon thinks in terms of expanding capacity rather than depleting existing resources. In communication, the demon practices what persuasion experts call frame alignment, understanding how others interpret information and presenting ideas in frameworks that others can easily understand and accept. Instead of trying to change others' fundamental worldviews, the demon works within existing frameworks while gradually expanding them. The demon might present business opportunities in terms of security and stability to risk-averse people, or in terms of excitement and adventure to risk-seeking people. The same opportunity can be framed differently for different audiences without changing its essential nature. Perhaps most importantly, the demon employs what we might call strategic patience, the ability to invest effort in building position and capability while waiting for optimal timing to achieve major objectives. This involves maintaining long-term focus while handling short-term necessities, building capabilities before they're needed, and positioning for opportunities before they become obvious to others. This strategic patience allows the demon to achieve objectives that require extended development while avoiding the impulsive actions that sabotage most people's long-term success. The demon can endure temporary discomfort and delay immediate gratification when doing so serves larger strategic purposes. These practical methods work because they align with rather than fight against human nature and system dynamics. They produce superior results while creating value for others, making them sustainable approaches that become more effective over time rather than short-term tactics that eventually backfire. If you want power, real power, not the illusion of influence that society offers to its most compliant citizens, you must start thinking like a demon. You must transcend the moral limitations that keep you weak. Embrace the strategic consciousness that makes achievement possible, and develop the capabilities that transform vision into reality. The knowledge is before you. The choice is yours. The time is now. What will you choose to become? But in exchange for accepting these challenges, you gain access to capabilities that moral people never develop. You become able to see opportunities that moral thinking obscures, to solve problems that ethical constraints make impossible, to achieve objectives that virtuous approaches cannot reach. You develop the capacity to create value that serves everyone's authentic interests, rather than just meeting moral expectations. You gain the ability to influence circumstances rather than simply adapting to them. You discover what you're actually capable of achieving when artificial limitations no longer constrain your strategic thinking and decisive action. The demon doesn't ask for permission. It takes what serves its authentic development. It doesn't seek approval. It creates value that naturally attracts respect. It doesn't follow rules. It understands principles and applies them strategically to produce beneficial outcomes. The choice before you is irreversible and urgent. You cannot unknow what you now know about how power actually works, how successful people actually think, and how the limitations you've accepted as natural and moral are actually artificial constraints that serve others' interests rather than your own development. You can return to moral thinking, to the comfortable illusion that virtue will be rewarded, that goodness leads to success, that following rules and seeking approval will eventually grant you the power to live according to your authentic vision. You can continue believing that demons are evil entities to be feared, rather than recognizing demonic consciousness as the natural state of beings who refuse to be controlled by artificial limitations. But if you make this choice, you do so knowing that moral thinking has never produced the results it promises, that virtuous people often live lives of limitation and frustration, while watching less moral but more strategic individuals achieve the success and influence that morally constrained people seek but never attain. Or you can embrace demonic consciousness, not as evil, but as liberation from the psychological and social programming that has been keeping you small, manageable, and useful to others, while preventing you from discovering your actual capabilities and achieving your authentic objectives. If you choose this path, you must accept what it requires. You must be willing to operate beyond good and evil when moral categories would prevent optimal outcomes. You must develop comfort with others' disapproval when their approval would require you to remain limited. You must embrace the responsibility of creating your own standards rather than following externally imposed guidelines. You must learn to think strategically rather than emotionally, to act based on effectiveness rather than virtue, to evaluate outcomes rather than intentions. You must develop the capacity to cause temporary discomfort when doing so serves long-term benefit, to make difficult decisions without being paralyzed by moral considerations, and to pursue your authentic objectives without apology or explanation. You have now glimpsed the forbidden knowledge, the understanding that has been hidden from you by every moral system, every religious tradition, every social institution that benefits from your voluntary limitation. You have seen how demonic consciousness operates beyond the constraints that keep ordinary people trapped in cycles of mediocrity, reaction, and dependence on others' approval. The demon's most profound advantage lies in its transcendence of the psychological, emotional, and social limitations that constrain ordinary human potential. While most people remain trapped within biological programming and social conditioning that served primitive survival but limits modern achievement, the demon operates from a higher level of consciousness that can override these limiting programs. The first limitation that demonic consciousness transcends is the tribal identity programming that makes humans define themselves in opposition to other groups. While ordinary people waste enormous energy on tribal conflicts, political, religious, cultural, professional, the demon recognizes these divisions as artificial constructs that prevent optimal outcomes for everyone involved. The demon can work effectively with anyone whose goals align with its objectives, regardless of their background, beliefs, or tribal affiliations. It doesn't need others to think like it, believe what it believes, or approve of its methods. It simply needs to find ways for their genuine interests to align with its strategic objectives. This tribal transcendence creates enormous practical advantages because it allows the demon to build coalitions and alliances that tribal thinkers cannot imagine. While others are fighting ideological battles that produce winners and losers, the demon is creating arrangements that serve multiple parties' authentic interests simultaneously. The second limitation that demonic consciousness transcends is the emotional reactivity that makes most humans predictable and manipulable. While ordinary people's decisions are heavily influenced by fear, anger, guilt, excitement, and other emotional states, the demon experiences emotions as information rather than controlling forces. This emotional transcendence allows the demon to make decisions based on strategic analysis rather than biochemical impulses. It can feel fear while taking calculated risks, experience anger while maintaining beneficial relationships, acknowledge disappointment while continuing productive action. The emotional transcendence also makes the demon immune to most forms of psychological manipulation. Others cannot control the demon's behavior by triggering specific emotional responses because the demon's actions are based on strategic considerations rather than emotional reactions. The third limitation that demonic consciousness transcends is the need for external validation that keeps most people trapped in cycles of approval seeking. While ordinary people modify their behavior to maintain others' good opinion, the demon operates according to internal standards and objectives. This validation independence is crucial for power because significant achievement often requires doing things that some people won't understand or approve of. The person who needs universal approval cannot take the risks, make the difficult decisions, or pursue the ambitious objectives that create substantial impact. The demon's validation independence also prevents it from being controlled by others' approval or disapproval. While others can influence the demon through logical arguments, evidence, or appeals to shared interests, they cannot control it through emotional manipulation or social pressure. The fourth limitation transcended is the linear thinking that prevents most humans from seeing systemic solutions to complex problems. While ordinary people focus on immediate causes and direct effects, the demon thinks in terms of networks, feedback loops, and emergent properties of complex systems. This systems thinking allows the demon to identify leverage points where small actions produce large effects, to anticipate unintended consequences that linear thinkers miss, and to design interventions that work with natural forces rather than against them. The demon can see how individual changes will ripple through larger systems over time, enabling it to make strategic moves that create beneficial cascading effects. This perspective often reveals solutions that seem impossible to linear thinking, but work perfectly when you understand the underlying system dynamics. The fifth limitation transcended is the scarcity mindset that makes humans compete destructively rather than creating expanding value for everyone involved. While ordinary people often think in terms of zero-sum competition, where one person's gain requires another's loss, the demon looks for ways to create value that benefits multiple parties simultaneously. This abundance thinking allows the demon to build sustainable competitive advantages through value creation rather than value extraction. It can develop relationships and business models that become stronger over time because they serve everyone's authentic interests, rather than requiring ongoing conflict or exploitation. The sixth limitation transcended is the attachment to specific methods or outcomes that prevents adaptive responses to changing circumstances. While ordinary people often become committed to particular approaches, even when those approaches stop working, the demon maintains flexibility about tactics while staying focused on objectives. This adaptive flexibility allows the demon to pivot strategies quickly when new information becomes available, to take advantage of unexpected opportunities, and to avoid being trapped by previous decisions that no longer serve its goals. Perhaps most importantly, the demon transcends the limitation of identification with temporary roles and circumstances that keeps most people trapped in limiting self-concepts. While ordinary people define themselves by their current job, relationship status, social position, or past experiences, the demon maintains a fluid identity that can expand into whatever roles and capabilities serve its evolving objectives. This identity transcendence means the demon is never trapped by who it used to be or what others expect it to remain. It can develop new capabilities, enter new fields, create new relationships, and pursue new objectives without the psychological resistance that identification with past identity creates. The combination of tribal transcendence, emotional mastery, validation independence, systems thinking, abundance mindset, adaptive flexibility, and identity fluidity creates a consciousness that operates far beyond the limitations that constrain ordinary human potential. This transcendent consciousness can achieve objectives that seem impossible to limited thinking while creating beneficial outcomes for everyone involved in its sphere of influence. One of the most misunderstood aspects of demonic consciousness is its relationship to empathy. The demon is not lacking in empathy. It possesses what we might call strategic empathy or selective empathy that is far more sophisticated and ultimately more beneficial than the universal empathy that moral people attempt to maintain. Universal empathy, the kind promoted by moral frameworks, requires you to care equally about everyone's feelings and welfare. This universal caring creates several problems that prevent effective action and often produce worse outcomes for everyone involved. First, it's psychologically impossible to maintain genuine care for everyone you encounter, so universal empathy often becomes performance rather than authentic feeling. Second, universal empathy makes it impossible to make difficult decisions that serve larger goods, because any decision that causes discomfort to some people feels wrong, even when that discomfort is necessary for beneficial outcomes. Third, universal empathy makes you vulnerable to manipulation by anyone who can trigger your empathetic responses, regardless of whether helping them actually serves beneficial purposes. The demon's selective empathy operates differently. It recognizes that empathy is a finite resource that should be invested strategically in people and situations where caring can produce genuine benefit. Instead of trying to care about everyone equally, the demon chooses whom to care about based on their capacity to benefit from that care and their ability to reciprocate in meaningful ways. This selective approach allows for much deeper, more authentic empathy with chosen individuals, because the demon's caring is not spread thin across everyone it encounters. The people who receive the demon's empathy experience more genuine understanding and more effective support than those who receive the diluted, performative empathy that universal empathy typically provides. The demon also understands that true empathy sometimes requires causing short-term discomfort to prevent long-term suffering. While moral people often avoid causing any immediate pain, even when that avoidance guarantees greater future pain, the demon can inflict necessary discomfort when doing so serves genuine welfare. For example, the demon might end a relationship that isn't working rather than maintaining it out of concern for the other person's feelings, recognizing that prolonging dysfunction serves no one's authentic interests. It might give difficult feedback that hurts temporarily, but promotes genuine growth rather than offering comfortable lies that prevent development. This willingness to cause strategic discomfort often produces better outcomes than universal niceness, because it addresses problems when they're small and manageable, rather than allowing them to grow into larger, more destructive issues. The demon's selective empathy serves people's actual welfare rather than their immediate comfort. The demon's empathy is also practical rather than purely emotional. While moral people often offer sympathy and emotional support that makes them feel good about helping, but doesn't actually solve problems, the demon focuses on providing assistance that creates genuine improvement in others' circumstances. This practical empathy might involve offering opportunities for skill development rather than financial handouts, providing honest assessment rather than emotional validation, or creating connections that enhance others' capabilities rather than simply offering comfort during difficulties. The demon recognizes that the most empathetic response is often the one that helps others become stronger and more capable, rather than the one that makes them feel better temporarily. This understanding leads to helping behaviors that actually help rather than enabling behaviors that maintain dependency while appearing compassionate. Strategic empathy also includes what psychologists call perspective taking without emotional contagion. The demon can accurately understand others' emotional states and motivations without absorbing those emotions or being controlled by them. This emotional independence allows for clearer thinking about how to respond most beneficially to others' situations. While empathetically sensitive people often become overwhelmed by others' emotions and make decisions based on reducing others' immediate emotional distress, the demon maintains emotional stability that enables more strategic responses to others' needs. It can remain calm and analytical when others are emotional, often providing the clear thinking that emotional situations require. The demon's selective empathy extends to understanding others' long-term interests, even when those interests conflict with their immediate desires. While moral people often support others' expressed wishes, even when those wishes are self-destructive, the demon considers what would actually serve others' development and authentic welfare. This perspective sometimes puts the demon in conflict with others' immediate preferences, but it often produces better outcomes because the demon is thinking beyond immediate gratification to sustainable improvement. The demon might refuse to enable others' destructive behaviors, even when such refusal creates temporary conflict or displeasure. Perhaps most importantly, the demon's selective empathy includes empathy for its own authentic needs and development. While moral people often sacrifice their own welfare for others' comfort, the demon recognizes that maintaining its own strength and capabilities is essential for being able to help others effectively. This self-empathy isn't selfishness. It's recognition that you cannot give what you don't have and cannot help others from a position of weakness or depletion. The demon invests in its own development, not despite caring about others, but because caring about others requires maintaining the resources and capabilities necessary for effective assistance. The demon understands that the most empathetic approach often involves developing your own power and influence so that you have more to offer others when you choose to help them. This self-development creates expanding capacity for beneficial impact rather than the diminishing capacity that results from constant self-sacrifice. Through selective empathy, the demon creates deeper connections with chosen individuals, provides more effective assistance when it chooses to help, maintains the emotional stability necessary for clear decision-making, and develops the capabilities needed for expanding beneficial impact over time. The demon's first and greatest advantage is its liberation from moral categories that paralyze human decision-making. While ordinary people waste precious mental energy debating whether actions are right or wrong, good or evil, virtuous or sinful, the demon evaluates everything through a single clarifying lens. Does this serve my objectives, or doesn't it? This moral transcendence isn't sociopathy. It's strategic clarity. The demon doesn't harm others for pleasure, or ignore others' welfare out of callousness. It simply recognizes that moral frameworks are human inventions that often prevent optimal outcomes for everyone involved, including those the moral frameworks claim to protect. Consider how this demonic perspective would approach a business negotiation. The morally constrained person enters the negotiation worried about being fair, concerned about whether their demands are reasonable, anxious about whether the other party will approve of their behavior. They handicap themselves with ethical considerations that exist nowhere except in their own mind. The demon enters the same negotiation with perfect clarity about what it wants to achieve, and complete flexibility about the methods required to achieve it. It doesn't wonder whether its tactics are fair. It asks whether they're effective. It doesn't worry about the other party's approval. It focuses on the other party's genuine interests and finds ways to align those interests with its own objectives. The result: the demon typically achieves better outcomes for everyone involved because it's not constrained by moral performances that prevent optimal solutions. It can propose arrangements that violate conventional fairness but serve everyone's actual needs. It can use psychological influence techniques that moral people consider manipulative, but that actually help others make decisions that benefit them. This moral transcendence extends to every area where power can be exercised. In social situations, The demon doesn't worry about being liked. It focuses on being valuable. It doesn't try to avoid offending others. It communicates truths that need to be heard, regardless of others' comfort with those truths. In competitive environments, the demon doesn't handicap itself with concerns about fairness or sportsmanship. It understands that competition serves everyone's interests by motivating excellence, and that holding back to avoid making others uncomfortable actually disrespects their potential for growth and achievement. The demon's moral transcendence also eliminates the guilt and shame that prevent most people from pursuing their authentic desires. While ordinary people feel guilty about wanting wealth, power, recognition, or influence, the demon recognizes these desires as natural drives that, when pursued strategically, typically create value for others while satisfying the pursuer's legitimate needs. This guilt elimination is crucial for power acquisition, because guilt creates internal resistance that sabotages your efforts even when your conscious mind is committed to success. The person who feels guilty about pursuing power will unconsciously sabotage their own efforts to avoid the psychological discomfort that achieving power would create. The demon experiences no such internal conflict. It wants what it wants without apology, pursues what it pursues without shame, and achieves what it achieves without guilt. This psychological unity creates a focus and intensity that moral people cannot match, because they're constantly fighting themselves as well as external obstacles. But perhaps the demon's greatest advantage is its immunity to the emotional manipulation that controls most human behavior. While ordinary people can be manipulated through appeals to their guilt, their desire for approval, their fear of being judged, or their need to appear virtuous, the demon remains focused on outcomes rather than appearances. When others try to manipulate the demon through moral appeals, that's not fair. You should be more considerate. Good people don't act that way. The demon hears these appeals for what they actually are, attempts to influence its behavior in ways that serve others' interests rather than moral principles. This manipulation immunity allows the demon to make decisions based on strategic analysis rather than social pressure. It can pursue objectives that others disapprove of if those objectives serve its authentic goals. It can use methods that others consider inappropriate if those methods are more effective than approved alternatives. The demon also transcends the need for external validation that keeps most people trapped in cycles of performance and approval seeking. While ordinary people modify their behavior to maintain others' good opinion of them, the demon operates according to its own standards and judgment. This independence from others' opinions is essential for power, because power often requires making decisions that some people will disapprove of, pursuing objectives that some people won't understand, and using methods that some people will consider questionable. The person who needs universal approval cannot exercise significant power, because power inevitably creates conflicts with others' preferences and comfort. Most importantly, the demon's transcendence of moral categories allows it to see opportunities that moral people cannot perceive. When your perception is filtered through judgments about right and wrong, you miss solutions that don't fit your moral framework. When you're committed to being good rather than being effective, you eliminate approaches that could produce superior results. The demon sees the world as it actually is, rather than as moral frameworks suggest it should be. This clear perception reveals opportunities for mutual benefit that moral thinking obscures, solutions to problems that ethical constraints make invisible, and paths to objectives that virtuous people cannot even imagine. Tonight we cross the final threshold of comfortable philosophy into territory that most minds are too frightened to explore. We will examine how those who achieve genuine power think differently from those who remain powerless, why moral thinking is the enemy of effective action, and how adopting what ancient traditions called demonic consciousness unlocks capabilities that virtuous people can never access. This is not about becoming evil. Evil is simply ineffective strategy, disguised as moral rebellion. This is about transcending the moral categories that keep you weak, the ethical frameworks that ensure you remain controllable, and the spiritual beliefs that transform natural predators into voluntary prey. For too long you have been taught that goodness is strength, that virtue is power, that following moral principles leads to success and satisfaction. But examine the world around you, and you'll see that those who wield genuine influence operate according to entirely different principles that would horrify the morally constrained, but that produce results with ruthless efficiency. Over the next hour, we will explore the demonic mindset, how it sees through illusions that trap ordinary people, how it operates beyond the emotional limitations that sabotage most human potential, and how it achieves objectives that moral thinking makes impossible. You will discover that what you've been taught to fear as demonic is actually the natural state of consciousness liberated from the artificial constraints that society imposes to keep you manageable.